Shut up. Good morning. Welcome to Brave Indigenous Conversations with Joan Jack. I'm Joan Jack, and this morning we have Sandra DELARONDE with us. And as usual, I think this is episode 18. Time is flying. So I like to begin with reading this piece of writing that I found that I just love. I'm going to do that now. An invitation to a brave space. Together we will create brave space because there is no such thing as safe space. We exist in the real world. We all carry scars, and we have all wounds. In this space, we seek to turn down the volume of the outside world. We amplify voices that fight to be heard elsewhere. We call each other to more truth and love. We have the right to start somewhere and continue to grow. We have the responsibility to examine what we think we know. We will not be perfect. It will not always be what we wish it to be, but it will be our brave space together, and we will work on it side by side. Mickey Scott B. Jones. And I looked her up when I heard the writing, and she's a Black woman who's gone to the spirit world now. And yeah, one of these times I'm going to learn more about her. Okay, so Sandra DELARONDE is a lifelong friend of mine and our guest today. So I'd like to invite you to introduce yourself, Sandra.
Good morning. Yes, Joan and I have been friends
Hmm?
for many, many years, decades, and I guess in many ways have had to be brave, have put on a
Mhm.
brave face and put on our brave shoes, and for you, your red cowboy boots, and marched for our people and for ourselves and our families. And I think where our lives also connect is that uh, we took time out to raise our families, to put our energy and our focus on raising good humans. And
Mhm.
and for me, I know coming back and finding, still maintaining a little bit of the work, right, through that raising of children, um, to coming back and finding that the situation has not changed for Indigenous women. In fact, it's gotten much worse. And so rather than sit back at this point in our lives, we're still, you know, ensuring that the conversation continues and the work continues, but more importantly, um, that there is action and sustainable change. I think that's the beauty of taking on a long view, and that's certainly, looking at our on how our lives have been um, similar,
Mhm.
throughout our lifetimes in that focus for um, knowing that if we're going to be part of change, the change starts at home,
Ah,
and then bringing it out into the world.
mhm.
Yeah.
So I know who you are, Sandra, but tell everyone who you are. Who
Well,
are
that's
you?
part of who I am. That's part of who I am. I'm
Some of these
so
European labels going here.
yeah. I guess I'm going to tell you a longer story because it
Sure.
really defines who I am, and
Okay.
that's one of my and in relation to the work that we do. So the National Inquiry had a finding of genocide, right? And that was accepted by all governments, federal and provincial governments, and caused the world to turn its eyes toward Canada and say, "What?" So, one of the best places to live in the world has a problem with genocide of its original people. So, you know, eyes are on Canada, but for Canadians and even for Indigenous people, they'll say, "Well, you know, we're not living in a genocide, or we have not been impacted by genocide," because they don't see we're certainly different than Rwanda and different than the Holocaust in Europe, but it's a sustained It's a sustained genocide. And what that means on an individual basis is, for me, um, one of my grandmothers had been head woman of her community of Duck Bay. And Duck Bay was invited to the treaty making table, Treaty 4. And when they got there, she wasn't allowed to take her place at the table, only for the fact that she was a woman.
Mm.
And as a result, her community was not let into as a signatory for Treaty 4.
Mm.
So then they were called back for the adhesion to Treaty 4. And this time she appointed her grandson to be the
Mm.
head man for the purposes of negotiating the treaty. He got to sit at the table.
Mm.
So, that's to me a prime example of how does that impact me? How has that impacted me? And how has that impacted the generations of women that have come since? There was a concerted effort to silence the voice of Indigenous women since the time of, since before the treaty making process, to the treaty making process on the prairies, to the residential schools, of course, and with the Indian Act, which caused women to lose their status for the simple fact of marrying outside of the legal definition of status. So my grandmother had lost her status as a treaty person as a result of marrying a Métis who came from the Red River.
Mm.
And we know that, those that lived in the Red River that were Scottish descendants had come to this Canada because they were displaced as well. They were displaced by payments to the slave traders, and they lost their land in the Orkneys, so they ended up in the Red River.
Mm.
So, they weren't happy when they got here. So you have all these unhappy people, right? Just trying to find a way to live, and as a result of that government processes, when they came to Canada and made relationships with the Dakota and Cree people, they ended up moving north to Pimichigamac, and were free traders, so they were not people that were company men kind of.
Mm.
So they held their own.
Mm.
So I think that too is also kind of informs who I am, right? Not someone who's going to follow a party line, but will take the position of the people of my family first.
Mm.
And my grandmother is credited for saving 6 of the young girls in during the fire in St. Joseph's Residential School in Cross Lake.
Mm.
And as a result, she was always treated with such a profound respect that followed her and her children through the generations, in addition to being a midwife. So always that care and compassion. And I think all those, when I look at them, I look at those that have gone before me and recognize that that they stood their ground, right?
Mm.
somehow that really is part of who I am today. You know, um, from their strength, they have given me strength. Um, who I am, or what I do, the work I'm currently doing in the world is I have my own business. My actual business is doing business plans and, you know, teaching entrepreneurship. But I also continue to do the work um, on missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. And I'm really grateful for the families of MMIW who told their story, shared the story of their loved ones to the inquiry. And as a result, we're able to create certainly the finding of genocide, but the 231 calls for justice. That impacts all of us as Indigenous women and girls and gender diverse relatives, but it also impacts the rest of Canada.
Yeah.
Because while they are 231 calls to justice, I don't think that it's entirely our responsibility to continue to move forward for change, because many of those calls are calls to Canada, calls to the province to recognize and implement the human rights instruments.
Yeah.
And right now, if we consider the whole finding of genocide, and we look at the success of government policies, as Indigenous women, we are under the international framework can be viewed as internally displaced persons. In other words, we are refugees in our own land. In that, you know, when the Sharon McIver and others had fought to regain recognition or legal rights, because they've always held their identity, but not legal rights or legal framework under Bill C-31 or S-3. When the government had finally accepted that as a result of the International Tribunal, they did not increase the land that they had been taken or held in trust. They did not increase the financial resources. Basically, what they said was, okay, we will give you your legal recognition, but you're going to have to fight for the rest.
Yeah.
Right? And so that's where we are. And that's the work. I think that's the greater work, is to ensure that Canada and the provinces, fulfill their human rights obligations. And so then, on a much, I guess, on the headstone information. So I teach small business development. I also teach a course at the University of Winnipeg in the Masters in Development Practice, which falls under the Global College, on 231 calls to justice. So it's just understanding for the next generation of leaders what are 231 and what is your responsibility to ensuring policy change, because I think that's where we need to be at. We need to be working with the next generation of leaders. So that's what I do. I'm a mom and a grandmother, and that's it. A sister, man. We just had our family reunion this weekend, just our immediate family, and there were like 91 of us.
What?
And it was like 3 3 generations.
Yeah. How many sisters and brothers do you have?
I have 3 sisters, and I have uh, 4 brothers that are still in this world. So, yeah,
Mm,
yeah. And then they each have children and grandchildren.
wow.
It
Nine
was
to
wonderful.
20. Wow. Where did you have it?
Well, up in the Paw at Clearwater Lake, the second largest Clearwater lake in the world.
Mm,
We always say that when you grow up and having access to Clearwater Lake, you become a lake snob. You don't want to swim in anywhere else that isn't as clear as Clearwater.
love it.
Yeah.
One of the things I'm learning to do as a podcaster is to take a few notes when people are sharing and thoughts that. So I'm just going to go through some of my notes if that's okay with you.
Sure.
Okay. So first of all, Sandra also didn't say that I believe you have your master's in governance as well, right?
Uh,
Headstone information. What is it?
Justice and public safety.
Justice and public safety. Wow, that's pretty
Yes.
cool. I
Yes.
never did go on to get a master's, and that's kind of a thing, but too late now. I'll just write a book
No,
someday.
it's not too late, you know? I was thinking of doing a PhD in Finland because you get a top hat and a
Oh,
sword. You get a top hat and a sword when you graduate. So,
can you do it online?
well, I'm investigating. I'll let you know.
Yeah,
Maybe we'll
okay,
both have our own swords that will be beaded.
okay. So funny. So for listeners who aren't familiar, like I said, this is new to me. Podcasting is new to me. The national inquiry to which Sandra referred, it was formally. Can you give us the formal name of the inquiry?
National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls.
Right.
That was the mandate,
Hmm.
but the commissioners saw that our gender diverse relatives have not been represented.
Hmm.
So they included um, the our relatives to have a voice. You know,
Hmm.
because those 2S LGBTQIA relatives um, are the most are subject to the greatest amount of violence in this country
Hmm.
and need to be protected, need to be respected,
Yeah.
you know, in the same way that we hope to be.
Mm. Yeah. No. No.
Yeah.
I know I'm not a political science expert in that area at all. I just know that what I'm going to say, what I'm going to call, like the amount of homophobia in Indian country is really bad, really, really bad. Our people who are gender diverse, as you've used the term, are
Mhm.
super oppressed, and it's wrong. That's not our traditional way. Um, so I loved, not loved, loved. Who would love these words? But when you said internally displaced persons, refugees in our own land, it made me think of the word ishkunigan. And I'm not saying I'm a language expert either, but I'll tell a story. So my mom used to work for Northway Aviation in
Mhm.
Winnipeg, just north of Winnipeg, there at St. Andrews. And this man from Little Grand was talking to her in the language. And she said to him, Auntie Wenchi, and she said, like, where are you from? And he said, Little Grand. And, and so then she said to him, Auntie Jayan, like, where are you going? And he said, Ishkunigan. And the other part of the conversation I found super cool was that when she made his ticket, she slid it towards him to sign. And he said something that I did because my language skills are just conversational. Like, are you cold? Are you hungry? Are you lost? Whatever, just basic. There goes my husband behind me in the podcast. He's so cute, just ignores what I'm doing completely. um, so, anyways, she slid the ticket towards him and he said something I didn't understand. So after he left, I had a conversation with her about the things that they said in our language that I didn't understand. And I said, what did he say when you slid the ticket? Oh, she said he asked me if I should write curvy or straight. like cursive or printing, eh? I thought that was so cool. And then I said to her, what does a shkunigan mean? And she said, reserve. I said, Mom, you're translating for the convenience of English. I said, what does it really mean to you? Oh, I hate it when you do that to me, she said. And then she thought about it for a while. Huh, leftovers. And, I just burst into tears, like literally tears sprung out of my eyes. And I know there are, Indigenous people, Ojibwe people that say it doesn't mean leftovers. It means what we saved, what we saved for ourselves, which is, at the risk of offending people, which I'm doing every Tuesday, but I think that's a really romanticized translation. I'm not saying it's not accurate. But, my mom is a practical sovereignist. My mom, my mom, she's really strong, tough, and friggin' clear. Like, you know where you stand with her all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so, for her, it meant leftovers. Like, oh my God, our ancestors didn't pick a word to describe where they were living, like beautiful place of bounty. And aren't we going to be doing good here?
Mm-hmm.
They could have called it, beautiful land, healthy land. They didn't call it Minuake. They called it Shkunigan, leftovers, like that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just wanted to make that comment. And then, because you brought it up in my mind, in my heart, and then you spoke about Bill C-31 and S2. For listeners who don't have our S3, I mean, our background, I know what they are, but you want to give a little synopsis of what your understanding of those that legislation is? Or not?
Okay. Yeah. Basically, in the, I think it was 1928. I don't remember.
Yeah.
What do you call that? Years, but in the old Indian Act, Indigenous women who married outside of treaty were their status as under the treaty was removed from them. And that also applied to people who got grade 12 or fought in the war.
Yeah.
And so then that resulted in women, what was known as road allowance people, or women were left from their communities, denied access to their communities. So they ended up in urban centers, right? And so like in Winnipeg, a great majority of Indigenous women ended up here. And we have, all kinds of stories about that. But we also have stories of strength. We have the story of Mary Richard. We have the story of Mrs. Morrisseau. I can't remember her first name. But all those women got together from different nations and created a community here. They created the Friendship Center. They created the language daycare. They fought for the Children of the Earth High School. So like, even though they were displaced from their communities, they still had the strength to recreate community.
You know what? I just want to interrupt you. I remember when I was 18, you were involved. We created the Indigenous Women's Collective. I'm 62 now. Remember that?
Yeah.
And we called it Indigenous Women's Collective in Winnipeg.
We
and
did.
Then I was the executive director, and I went out and enrolled like 500 plus women for $3 to $5 membership fee.
Yeah.
We've been at this a while.
Yes, for sure. And so, we used Indigenous before it was popular, because we understood that relationship.
Yeah.
They should have had us at the table. And so that's a story of strength. But in terms of the legal framework, women were denied access to their communities, access to the rights and responsibilities that kind of were enshrined in the Indian Act. Um, Also, were denied their rightful place of leaders in their communities.
Mm.
Um, so it was women such as Mary Tuax early, Sandra Lovelace. I'm just trying to think of the others that had taken Canada to court, to international court.
Corbier, I think. Anyway.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, Corbier Laval. I think that was the name of the
Yeah.
case, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, and as a result of that, Canada was, I should say, forced or required to review its legislation and um, include Indigenous women who had been displaced.
Hmm.
So that's what we call Bill C-31.
And others that were automatically enfranchised, like you named some of the areas. Like if you wanted to purchase land, you had to give up your registration as an Indian. If you wanted to become a priest or a minister of any kind, you had to give up your registered Indian status. If you wanted to go to university, like you were saying, grade 12, if you wanted to do anything with education, um, if you wanted to drink alcohol, some people gave up they were automatically enfranchised because they wanted to drink alcohol like the rest
Mhm.
of the world. um, so these things happened automatically and legally, and many people are just discovering their lineage because of that enfranchisement.
Mhm.
They were displaced, and like you said, become internally displaced people. So there were generations of internally displaced people, Indigenous people. Yeah.
Exactly.
What is S3?
S3 was the McIver case. That was a case that was advanced by Sharon McIver, because her grandchildren were under the Bill C-31 would only go to second generation. And then S3 would include so that would have been like a mother or a grandmother and a mother, but then their grandchildren were not recognized
Mhm.
under that legal framework. So
Mhm.
Sharon McIver again had to take that case to an international tribunal, and they found in her favor, um, and Canada then was required to include the next generation, the
Mhm.
grandchildren. And so that's what's called S3. But there are limitations to that as well in terms of the year.
The descent rights.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like so it's happened in our family just now recently. So my mom, um her grandchildren, my brother's children were not entitled to be registered as Indian, even though my brother is registered as Indian and we're registered as Indian. And so his children were not entitled. And just recently, because of the work Sharon McIver and all those who supported her did, my brother's children are now included as Barons River First Nation members. And so
Oh,
it's a very joyful thing. It's a very
yeah.
joyful thing. It's so much more than shitty glasses and having your teeth pulled.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's about place and belonging, that
Yeah.
this is the place you grew up, this is the place you come from, this is the place your ancestors grew up and came from, and this is who you are, because we define ourselves in the context of our community, not
Right.
not
Exactly.
as who we are individually. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's great. And I also wanted to make a comment, and then I'll turn it back over to you, what else you might want to share. I want to, you talked about the greater work. I think I spend a lot of time thinking and praying about, the greater work that I think is necessary in our communities is the healing of our fractured selves personally and our
Hmm.
fractured families. Like, it's so wonderful to hear of a family of, 91 at a picnic. Like, what the heck? That's
Hmm.
like your family is well on its way, I would judge, just by seeing that, to
Hmm.
healing how the Canadian state has attempted to fracture and basically rub out your family structure. If 91 of you can show up at a picnic, you're doing good. You know, there are
Yeah.
so many other families, Indigenous families in Canada, where we don't gather except at funerals.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's so sad. And much of the conflict that we experience as families is a consequence of our lived reality at residential and Indian day schools, where children were conditioned to be competitive and cruel and mean to people they are supposed to love.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
undoing that childhood conditioning is the greater work, I think, of today.
Yeah.
I see it where people do the most mean things in the community, and then I can see it in their eyes that they know what they're doing is wrong,
Mm-hmm.
but they still do it, you know, because of that childhood trauma and childhood conditioning. And it breaks my heart, breaks my heart.
Yeah. Well, so I can tell you that, yes, we have overcome in many ways, the impact of government policy.
Mm.
But I think what's really important to note, when I told you the story of my uh, grandmother who was called to the Treaty 4 and not allowed to talk. So we do have a matriarchal structure.
Mm.
In my mother's side of the family as well. My grandmother was the boss.
Mm.
And then my mother was the boss.
Mm.
And so we've maintained that matriarchal governance of our family,
Mm.
and um, our gathering this weekend is really, I think, attributed to that governance, because my sister is our matriarch, and she says, "We're having a family gathering." And we said, "Okay."
Yeah. You
That's it.
raise a really big point. I mean, for sure, there's the point of the matriarchal governance of our families, which I think is actually more globally widespread than the patriarchy would like everybody to believe.
Right.
Whether you're Italian or Japanese, like the role of the woman in the family. I mean, I don't really know about either of those cultures. I just said that. But I'm guessing that the role of the oldest female in the family is still something that very few family members want to cross. It's like,
Mhm.
hmm. But if you take that out, I want to talk about a sacred moose. Like there's a sacred moose in the middle of the room here that no one's talking about. And so some come in terms of the idea of matriarchy in terms of governance of the nation, you know? And so my limited understanding is that, for example, the Mohawk have a matriarchal governance in their clan systems, is what I've been told. I don't know if
Mhm.
that's right. And Ojibwe, we have a matriarchal governance of our families, but the clan system, I've been told, and I'm not saying this is right, it's just what I've been told, is patrilineal, and the leadership, like who you see at the front, is mostly men. So there's this big thing going on right now in Indian country where we're working to figure that out again.
Mhm.
And also younger men and women are having this thought and these conversations in the context of 2023. They're saying, yes, okay, it's good to figure out what was and what do we need today. So that was a whole big mouthful. What do you think about all
Yeah.
that?
Well, I still think that we need that matriarchal model if we are going to move uh, and withstand the storms that are coming. you know, absolutely, um, there is wisdom in um, women's experience from like that matriarchal process, which is different than, say, a woman in a chief's position, which is inherently patri- patriarchal, not
Mm,
patrilineal, but patriarchal,
mm,
and uh, and colonial. You
mm,
know, so it's not enough to put a woman into a patriarchal process and expect change, because it's a system that has to change,
yeah.
not who you have leading.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that's really critical. Um, and what when we look at what sustains our families and communities, you know, Joan, when you run in a political election, whether it's federal or provincial or municipal, you're going to go see the grandmothers in the communities still,
Mm,
because they are the ones that are going to make the decisions, and they are the ones that are going to uh, inform their family,
mm,
because families vote as blocks, who the candidate is that they should
mm,
support.
mm,
So you know that it still exists in what would be considered
mm.
um, an informal governance, but you know that the community is not going to move unless you have the buy-in of that informal governance.
Mm. So I loved what you said about, if you could elaborate on it, it's not enough to put women at the lead as chiefs or whatever we call them within a patriarchal system of governance. It's the system that has to be changed. So the behaviors, the corporate, cruel corporate behaviors that the patriarchal system, in my opinion, creates, it's not enough to just have women implementing those structures.
Exactly, because unless there is structural or systemic change, um, it's going to be the same thing.
Hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
it's like we elect um, Indigenous people to mainstream governance, federal and provincial,
Mm,
and expect change. Well, that is not going to happen because the system hasn't changed.
mm, mm.
Yeah. So they will do their best to, be their voice, to be our voice, but unless they're able to create wholesale systems change, then um, it's just band aids.
And so our leadership, in my opinion, gender aside, needs to be informed about the manner in which decisions are made, because there is some discretion. My understanding of the white law and white systems is that there is always discretion. There's a space of discretion that can be exercised. The executive power. We see it all the time, that can be exercised in the way that the leader chooses. And so, exercising that discretion as if you're a priest or a nun and really just concerned about the rules and order versus seeing what it is your people want and trying to figure out, how do we do this within the, like, we're in jail, we're trapped in the system of the colonial patriarchy. So how can we do our best within that jail to create space and decisions that are more humane, and not just hide behind the and say to our own people, oh, I'm sorry, that's just the way it is.
Hmm.
That just makes me crazy. Crazy. I go crazy.
Yeah,
I have to leave the building.
yeah, yeah. So then the question is, how do we support those that we uh, elect in federal and provincial governments to give them strength to make a difference? Like, is it possible?
Mm, yeah. I know. I mean, that's a good. I'm thinking of those we elect. I'm thinking we've got quite a number of Indigenous people in the government of Manitoba now, and I know for me, I pray for them all the time. Honest to God,
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
pray for them all the time, even if I don't like what they're saying or doing. I don't care. I pray for them, and I wish protection for them, and
Yeah.
strength for them, and health for them. And I think that there's a lot that we can do at the spiritual level for
Yeah.
our leaders. That's one thing. And then when I think about our leaders on the reserves, in the communities, um, I really wish there was a way that, no one puts their name forward for leadership. I don't believe just out of, 100% self-interest, whatever. They really believe that they're doing what they're doing for the good of the people, you know?
Mhm.
And how do we support them to deal with difference of opinion? Because right now, if you disagree with the chief and council, you pretty well just forget it. Just forget it. You're not going to
Mhm.
get a job. You'll probably won't get a house. You won't. Maybe you won't even get a water and sewer pump out. You know, and no one's
Yeah.
going to admit that's really what's happening. But
Mhm.
I get calls from people. That's really what's happening. So the ability to dissent in the context of our communities is critical as well. Eh?
I think so. I think that there is. So what I think has happened is that we really descended to this place of lateral violence, right? That is so pervasive, um, and people don't know how to express dissent in a constructive way, nor do those in leadership have the ability to understand it as, you know, looking past the personal to the practical issue.
Hmm.
And certainly we can say, oh, that's as a result of um, managing poverty all the time, because the uh, federal government only provides enough to manage poverty.
Mm.
So how do you and taken away the ability for communities and families to do things such as build their own homes,
Ah.
such as provide their own um, food, substance, and and then and then they look at the leadership and say, how come? But meanwhile, those policies really impact people's ability to look after themselves, right?
Mhm. Yeah. Hmm. Made
So,
you
what do
made
you?
me you made me think about when in 2003, I think it was, we decided I wanted to move home to Barron's because I'd lived in Tlingit country since 91 with my husband, and 92 with my husband, and I wanted to go home. And so we went home, and um my husband's a log cabin builder, and so he said, well, I want to build you a house, Joan. And I said, okay, then that's good. And so my cousins, our family, lots of the poorest people in the community helped us. And we went just north of Barron's towards Poplar River, and I didn't go. Brian and the men went, and we got the logs, and I helped around the building site and stuff. Um, but I had somebody in leadership come up to me and say, you need to stop doing that, because if you build your own house, Indian Affairs will stop giving us money for housing. I'm like, okay, thanks for sharing that with me, but we have the capacity to build our own houses. We built that whole house for about 50 grand, the price of a truck, you know,
Mhm.
not even that fancy of a truck, you know. I mean, the truck sitting outside my trailer here is worth more than 50,000. So we built that whole house with the help of family, community, you know. What I did too was there were people that are not they're not homeless in Barron's, but they're very poor people in the community they heard what we were doing, and so they would start coming and seeing what. And so I started making a lunch enough for like 20, kind of 30 people, like making big soups and lots of bannock, you know. And then we would all eat and laugh and work, and everybody worked together, and other people donated like old windows. And you know, we saw another house being torn down, so my husband went there and said to the guy whose house was being torn down, it had been condemned, what are you going to do with your windows, you know? And he kind of, Brian said, I said, how did that go? He said, well, he kind of looked at me like, what's wrong with me asking for garbage windows? And I said,
Mhm.
no, we'll take them. We're building a house. So, you know, we put stuff people were throwing away, we put in our house, you know. And
Mhm.
that's the spirit of, that's the spirit that's part of the fracturing, you know,
Yeah.
that people don't realize they can do, you know, if they just don't even, it's not that they're lazy, it's not that.
No.
People are so conditioned from that residential Indian day school experience, the colonial experience, to need to ask permission to be free. You don't need permission to be free.
Exactly.
Anyway, sorry, I kind of got on a bit of a soapbox there.
No. Hey, I'll stand with you on that soapbox.
So what else? We have a few minutes left. Time just flies.
Well, yeah, I think that's it. You know, on taking up our role and responsibility as rights holders,
Mm,
as free people, uh,
mm,
and that what does that translate into community? You know, whether it's a rural or northern community, or how does that translate in an urban environment?
mm,
And um, I think we can create greater opportunities for our loved ones. You know, um, you know, looking at the example of the women again who in the 70s, 1970s, even 60s, um, who built the Friendship Center movement,
mm,
who were the backbone of the uh, National Indian Brotherhood or the Manitoba Indian Brotherhood or the Manitoba Métis Federation or the Indigenous Women's Collective. I mean, we needed the Indigenous Women's Collective because the voices of women were not being heard and they're still not being heard, you know,
mhm.
so that's why we're still here.
That's why we're deadly cookums now.
That's why we're deadly.
Yeah, yeah. So in the few minutes we have left, Sandra, what kinds of things are you seeing in the future? Like what are you thinking about, even for your own life? You know, you and I are in our 60s now, and
Hmm.
so I'm still trying to pretend I can ride my Harley while I wait for knee surgery.
I know, it's like, how does that happen, right?
Yeah. Mm,
uh, I don't know. I think you know, I really want um, to help to create a world where my grandchildren
mm,
are able to thrive, not
mm,
just be safe, not just, you know, like uh, have to be escorted around because it's not a safe world for them. You know, I want them to be able to thrive, whether it's in Winnipeg or anywhere else in the world. You know, uh, to ensure that that world is safe for children.
mm,
Um, so that's kind of what informs me. Um, but personally, you know, like I said, never stop learning. whether it's going for a PhD for the sword and the top hat, or I'm doing a course in AI, artificial
Mhm. Oh,
intelligence.
are you? Wow.
Yes. Yes.
So cool. My son just my son just showed me this website. I love young people. I'm very open to young people. I was just my husband and I were just talking about that yesterday. He's so cute. We're driving along. He said, just random. And he said, I just realized. I said, what? I'm not that good at listening to people. And I said, what do you mean? Because he's very kind and compassionate and considerate. He said, well, yeah, I need to get better at listening to people. He said, you're really good at listening to people. And I said, well, what I had to overcome was, and I went for training, I went for personal development, was
Mhm.
that as soon as you started saying something I didn't agree with, I stopped listening,
Yeah.
you know, and I didn't even know I was doing that. It, you know, and so once I became aware, then that it's a skill to listen. So I love listening to young people. What the hell? Where was I going with all of that? Oh, my son. And so he said to me the other day, he said, Mom, let me show you something. He put it up on the TV through his Xbox, and he's 30. He's not a kid, but and so he put this website up, perplexity.ai. And so perplexity.ai is like I said, oh, that's like a Google search engine. He said, yeah, but way better than Google right now. Like apparently Google is moving into AI, but so he put in there, he said, watch this, Mom. He typed, what is the Nakina Call, which is our land-based healing organization in the middle of nowhere,
Mhm.
Holy smokes. I could see obviously that it had searched our website and any publications about it. And then it did a short analysis. And I was in like not even 30 seconds. It was like unbelievable.
Mhm.
Like if you go to that site, Sandra, and type in there, it's perplexity.ai, who is Sandra Delarond? It will. I did my own name yesterday and I was like, what the hell? So the AI. So where are you taking this course in AI? I
Oh,
want to take.
well, obviously, I'm doing it online,
Okay.
and it's quite. I'm actually doing it through this organization called Mind Valley. It's a self development
Yeah, yeah.
site, um, but yeah, it's probably 6 months.
Hmm,
Six
hmm.
months course.
And so
So
what will you be learning in the course about AI, I guess? What
it'll
is
be
AI?
yeah, all that, and then how to apply it. So you like practical skills, and because of my work like at the university, they use that's another issue in academia is the use of artificial intelligence to do your writing and
Right,
research.
right.
So that's good to know, but I can tell you that so I've used chat gpt to write reports, and yeah, a six something that would take days now takes like 6 seconds.
That's so
Right
crazy.
on, yeah.
Oh
So
my God.
so it's good to know. I mean, we use AI in our daily lives, like a remote, like something as simple as a remote, or when you're on a website and then the chat bots come up and
Yeah,
say,
yeah,
How can I
yeah,
help you?" So we just don't call it that. We just call it convenience, right?
yeah, yeah.
So part of this course is learning how to build AI
Mm.
within your organization or
Wow.
framework.
How
So
cool is that?
yeah.
I just started last night. I had my first class. I go to a lot of training through Landmark Worldwide, and I
Mhm.
just started. I think it's going to be almost a year. Their leadership training.
Oh,
And so I went to the class last night, first class last night. So I'm really excited about that too, because I get so confronted when I'm in landmark training. It's like, because what it does for me is we don't know what we don't know. a blind spot is a blind spot because it's a blind spot.
Right. Exactly.
So
Yeah.
the training is designed to reveal to you, for you to discover for yourself your blind spots. And I remember recently I had one. I just saw one about myself, and I was actually nauseous. I actually got sick. I was so confronted. I was like, oh, big one to let go of there. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess the takeaway for us is that we're both always learning. That's so good. I'm now AI, taking an AI courses on my list now. Oh my
Okay.
God. I'm gonna have to do that too.
Yeah.
Next thing.
Next thing. Well, I think the easiest way to learn is, and it's cheap, is to go to the Udemy site, and they have, I think, a learning chat GPT for, I think it's $19
Oh,
US.
what's Udemy? Let's spell it out.
Udemy.
U.com or just put Udemy in the search engine?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay, I never heard of that. What
yeah.
does that stand for?
I have no
No
idea.
idea? Okay, well, we don't care. It's a place
Yeah,
where you can learn cheap.
yeah, you can learn for cheap.
Yeah. Okay, I'll give you a couple of minutes to make your closing comments, and then I'm going to make mine.
Okay, so I think we've talked about some very deep and important issues, um, and family first for me. But more importantly, all of that, I think, would not be possible without a very strong connection to, you know, the spirit of the land, or the land, you
Mm,
know,
yeah.
a connection to ceremony that really honors and respects the role of women in this world, in this lifetime. And just without that connection, I don't think, for me, I would continue to do the work,
Mm,
you know.
mhm.
So however people um, see their relationship, that is what's going to get us through.
Our connection, spiritual connection to the
Yeah,
land and
yeah.
ceremony. I agree. I agree. We just got off the river. We were there 11 weeks at our camp, and our goal is to live there year round within a couple of years. And
Mhm.
we have Starlink down there, and it's like booming. It was so amazing. And
Mhm.
yeah, lots of grizzly activity this year. Oh my God. Yeah, they're living at one with nature is easily said.
Easily said, yes.
So we're actually going to be going to the expense, a big expense. I checked my savings. I started an automatic transfer to my savings account because I couldn't save. I just couldn't save. I just spend it. If I got it, I spend it. And so I did this. My daughter Lonnie's like, Mom, why don't you set an automatic transfer up to a savings account? I'm like, what a good idea. I checked my savings account, and I have enough money to pay for a helicopter to fly in, because we forgot. We had a little bit of smoked salmon left that we didn't eat, and we forgot it in the cabin, and some other stuff too that I need out here. And Brian said, "Well," I said, "So much money, Brian," and he said, "Well, Joan," he said, I it's up to you." He just leaves the decision making to me. And I thought about it, and I thought what he didn't say, but I've been on the land long enough to realize, is that, okay, when those grizzly bears run out of fish in the river and the berries are all gone and they smell my little bag of fish, they're going to be tearing the door down and knocking everything. And I like, okay, okay. So we're going to do that. And then we're going to drive to Manitoba. But yeah, I love the land. I love the land. I love being out there.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm going to close with I have a serious beating addiction. I have all kinds of addictions, and I've transferred some of them to some healthier things, like supporting Indigenous women artists. And so these are made by Becky Ann. You can find her on Facebook, BECKYANN, from Rosa River in Anishinaabe. She's a very humble woman, supports her children through her beading, and her beading is so beautiful. And I own so many Becky Ann earrings, it's not even funny. Anyways, this is one of my favorite words in our language. Kukuku'u is owl. Kukuku'u. So I love these earrings, and I love Becky Ann. So it's been an absolute pleasure visiting with you, Sandra, and I hope you come back again, because we didn't even talk about ceremony. There's all kinds of things we didn't talk about.
Yeah.
I'm going to end the broadcast. And I wanted to also say that if you caught this live, you can go to Spotify and search Brave Indigenous Conversations with Joan Jack, and you'll find all of the episodes there, because this is episode 18, I believe.
Wow,
So
excellent.
if you're driving, you can listen to the conversations I've had with 17 other people. It's crazy.
Yeah.
I'm going to end the broadcast, and then we'll say goodbye, Sandra?
Okay.